Inspirational Interlude, Monica Diaz.
I'm back. So if you liked it, you have the pleasure of seeing me again. If you didn't enjoy it, just stay there. Make believe, okay? I'll be gone soon. So I wanted to tell you a little bit more during the second interlude about the topic that I introduced during my first interlude, which was my book, okay? The book is called The 5 Dualities of Diversity and Inclusion, From Intent to Impact. And I told you how I came with the 5 dualities. I'm going to take a minute to talk to you about the first duality, which is called connect and learn. And the reason I wanted to talk to you more about that duality is because it has a great connection with networking, which is a topic that Fernando was just talking about. Or he said he didn't want to talk about networking, so he talked about caddies and golf, but that was the topic. I am sure that you remember the networking event, the reception last night. Did you? Some of you attended? Some of you who were here? Yes? You were networking? And how about lunch? We just had lunch. Were you networking there too? Yeah? Okay. So maybe, just maybe, the questions that you asked to the person who was sitting next to you were different than the ones that I'm going to ask, but bear with me. A typical interaction on networking, and where we're having lunch or a reception, goes more or less like this. Hi, how are you? What's your name? What company are you in? How long have you been there? What role do you have in the company? Is that right? Is that how your conversation started at lunch? Yeah? Okay. But what is most interesting about going through those repetitive questions, which are necessary, right? Because we need to know the name of the person, the place that they work, so we can figure out what is the kind of connection that we can make, that those are necessary questions. But what is very amusing is to see how the answers lead to a particular path, how those conversations actually evolve. So when you say, hi, how are you? What company do you work for? Hi, I work for this pharmaceutical company. Wonderful, I worked in pharmaceuticals before. What role do you have there? Well, I work in sales and marketing. Really? I used to work in sales and marketing too. I actually know Pedrito Suarez from that department. Do you know Pedro? And what we're doing during that interaction is going through a funnel of possibilities, going into narrowing it down to which are the connections, the similarities that we have to somebody else. I was compelled by sitting up so many people next to so many people of Bank of America to say, all my accounts are with Bank of America. I had to. I had to build that connection. It just was natural. Because that natural connection is something that we humans do. It makes us feel safe. It gives us comfort. It makes us become familiar more quickly. It helps build trust. It's normal and natural human behavior. And it's all good. That is absolutely all good. But what is also true is that once we go down that path, we weed out any kind of thing that is different from our experience. If we happen to like different teams in a particular sport, that's not going to build a connection. Okay? Probably it will build a rivalry. We weed out anything that doesn't give us a level of comfort at first. After we have a relationship with the person, then we might just have that rivalry and laugh about it. Those differences are then something that gives us something interesting to talk about, but not at first. Because we're looking for comfort. Safety is a natural behavior to have, right? But what is interesting in the work environment as leaders, as people who are networking all the time, is how quickly can you move from a normal, natural human behavior that is absolutely necessary to not only connect on your similarities, but to start learning from our differences. from other people. Because that's where the greatest learning occurs. Not on things that are like you and me. We're both from Puerto Rico and we're gonna cheer it. But what about if you're from Colombia or you're from Ecuador? Then maybe I have not been in that country and I need to learn more about that country. I could learn more about that country. So that is the opportunity to connect and learn. But when we start talking about differences, that's not a comfortable place to be. You know, in this time and age, it could be quite risky to start connecting on and learning from differences. For example, what do you do if you go into a meeting and one of your colleagues comes in wearing an African head wrap? Do you ignore it? Do you acknowledge it? Do you say something? Do you ask questions? Is it even appropriate to ask a question? What do you do if a colleague of yours, you're having natural conversation during lunchtime, and all of a sudden this colleague tells you that she is in an arranged marriage. She's from Asian descent, and she tells you that she's in an arranged marriage. Do you pry and ask, how did that happen? Do they still do that? Or do you kind of like let it go and don't even touch it? It could be scary. And what do you do if you are all of a sudden in a team that it's going to work together and a colleague who happens to be transgender comes in and you need to introduce this colleague to the rest of the team? What do you do? How do you go about it? These are situations that are not hypothetical. Each of those actually happened to me during the course of my career. That's why I wrote about them. And figuring out, okay, so which are the ways in which we can do this without fear, without a concern that we're going to, like, say something wrong, offend somebody. And the trick is, why do we want to even put ourselves in that situation? It's because the goal is not for us to be sitting in our organizations to add to the diversity of the organization because of our Latinidad. We're not there for somebody to check a box with us by our mere existence in the organization. Our goal in our value, as Fernando was saying, is to make sure that we leverage our Latinidad to be better leaders, to be more inclusive leaders, who can be more inclined to explore these topics in a more comfortable way because we are living it. We have lived in the bodies and in the minds of being different or feeling differently. So we can understand that. It comes to us more quickly. So we have an advantage over other people who may have not felt different at any time in their lives. And there are people who have felt like that. Okay? So that's our advantage. The goal is to really use your Latinidad to be the most inclusive leader that you can be. Yes, Monica, but that is still scary. How do I go about doing those things that you were talking about? Well, during the course of my working with different leaders, I figured out ways in which that could be done. So I laid it out in the book so everybody could read it. Number one step on how to become a more inclusive leader and learning, connecting and learning about differences in other people is just to go and discover. Discover in what I call a no-threat environment. Your goal could be in like the next few days, in the next 21 days, to go and explore, learn, without the fear, about a human difference that you're not comfortable with, or that you're concerned about, or you're curious about, right? That you want to know more about. Maybe the topic of like sexual orientation was not a topic that your family talked about while you were growing up. That's what happened in my family. If we had some neighbors who we knew had members of their family who were gay or lesbian, we just don't talk about that. Well, that didn't give us any learning. So how do you go about that? Is making sure that you initiate that space. If you're fearful of a topic, go read a book, watch an article, watch a movie, go to a play, a theater play that speaks about this topic that you're not comfortable about, that you're curious about. You're not going to offend anybody. This is something that you're doing on your own. But you're very intentional. You have to be intentional about it. You're doing it to learn. Step number 1, go and discover. I promise you, nobody's going to get offended. Step number 2, just go and develop yourself a little bit more. Find a buddy. You know, I'm a scuba diver, and I would never dare to go into deep waters without my buddy system, which is somebody who dives next to you, okay? You can make the signs, you can speak the language, you have your own code, like, right? You communicate. This is a person that you find a buddy, as you develop, you find a buddy to whom you can speak about your goal without a threat. This person, you can share your concerns about discovering this topic. You talk it with this person, either because you understand that you can trust this person to give you a very valid perspective, or because this person happens to be part of the differences that you're exploring. So you can talk it through because this person understands, because they're part of that group that has that difference, or just because it's somebody that you trust and will help you out in your goal. That's how you continue to develop. And the third way in which you can develop yourself and learn about differences is just to make sure that you go ahead and deliver yourself. It's what I call immersion. You get into your immersion process by putting yourself into the environment that you are trying to learn about. You become the person who is different. When that community, with that group of people who have that difference, are in the majority, and you are in the minority. But you're going there with the intent to learn. That's what I did when, again, I told you about how I grew up and the biases and the stereotypes, and that we don't talk about those things in terms of sexual orientation. So at some point in my career, as a DEI professional and a human resources executive, I wanted to make sure that when I was speaking about the LGBT community, I was legit. I was not playing a part. So my immersion process was to go with my husband, and we were the only cisgender couple that were in a party that was completely, it was an LGBTQ party. And we were the only people who were not. So from the party, we ended up actually going to the Pride Parade, marching with the LGBT community, right? But this didn't happen from one day to the next. I wanted to test if my understanding and my learning about the difference was legit, if I could stand in front of everybody to say, I understand, and I accept and I value. Therefore, I'm a more inclusive leader to everybody. So, make sure that you set some time for your own no-threat goal. Go and do a bit of a discovery, then develop through a buddy, and third, no fear. Go and immerse yourself into the environment that you want to learn more about. What comes out of that process is a more inclusive leader who happens to be Latino, but you become a more valuable resource to the organization because of your inclusiveness, and you become a better human being because of you engage others and value others, okay? So with that, I encourage you to go and start the exploration wherever you are. Discover, develop, or just deliver. And become the leader that you're meant to be, okay? So with that, I want to thank you. I want to check if there's one question or two before I give you a gift. Any question? I can't see. Oh, there's the question there. Sorry. Go ahead. Be loud. I'll be your echo.
I don't know how to be loud, but
Go ahead.
so as a gay Latino, what you just shared resonated with me. We all know someone in our family or friend network, someone who we may suspect is gay or part of the community, but like you said, we don't talk about it. I'm what you call a late bloomer.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. And your name is? Perdón? Joe. Thank you, Joe. So for those who are virtually may have not heard the question that Joe so bravely exposed to us. So he says he is identifying himself as part of the LGBT community, something that was difficult to come out to his family and also at work. And it's just recently, he said, like it took him a while to get to that place. And as an inclusive leader, he's asking, what can we do to be more inclusive ourselves and create a safe space for others to come out as well? Is that right, Joe? Okay. So I'll respond briefly with a thought that you might want to consider. When we start trying to identify how to become a more inclusive leader, we need to start with doing some internal check-in. We cannot just do this because it is a behavior that somebody told us that we need to exhibit, therefore we do it. We need to explore our own bias, our own ideas, our own values, our own beliefs that may come, as it happened in my case, from very early on in my life. And identify which of those values we are okay with and which are the ones that we're not. And if we're not, we start there with self-reflection. So you're grounded, you're sincere, you're authentic in your exploration. From there, you can then create a safe environment for others to also be vulnerable and tell you where they might be having some conflicts with what they want to do and what they want to learn. So create a safe space starts with self-clarity in terms of where you are in your identity and making sure that you give the other people same permission to be themselves. Okay? Thank you, Joe.